Welcome to Beyond Fight or Flight, a series from the Center for Healthy Churches. If you have people, you have differences. And sometimes those differences create tension. Our hope is to help you build a safer space for hard conversations, moving from reaction to discernment, from anxiety to grounded presence, and from division to trust building. Wherever your church is right now, we're here to help you take the next faithful step. Let's get started.
Hello, I'm Joel Snyder with the Center for Healthy Churches, and today I'm joined by several of my colleagues as we talk about trying to identify what is really happening in a congregation when tensions get to a place that someone might call us. So let me call on Bill Wilson. Bill, if you'd start and just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Bill Wilson, pastored for 33 years, and then for the last 17 or so, I've been working in consulting with congregational life. The Center for Healthy Churches is near and dear to my heart. I'm grateful for these folks and many others like them.
Bill Owen.
My name's Bill Owen. I live in Tennessee, just north of Nashville, and I've had the privilege of working with the Center for Healthy Churches for a number of years now. Pastored for 39 years, and much of my work centers on transition, pastoral change, vision, clarity, and of course conflict transformation as well. And it's really good work.
Frank?
I'm Frank Granger. I live in Athens, Georgia, and I have probably almost 40 years of experience in congregational life. I retired from First Baptist Church here in Athens just this past September after spending 36 years there on staff, and have just joined in with the Center for Healthy Churches and very glad to be a part of it.
And Ellen?
Hi, I'm Ellen Baxter. I live in San Francisco, California, and travel the Western Coast and Midwest to work with CHC. I've been with the Center for Healthy Churches for about almost 2.5 years, and I primarily work with leadership and team development, sustainable staffing structures, vision planning, all organizational development, and then change management solutions and conflict transformation.
That's great. So today we are talking about what people think might be going on and how we help identify what might actually be going on. So Bill Owen, let me ask you, when someone calls us, what are some of the reasons that they identify as the reason for tension in their congregation?
That's a great place to begin, because congregations are usually very clear about what they think the problem is. Over the years, I've heard all kinds of things like, well, you remember the days of the worship wars, but worship style, staffing decisions is one, finances, building use, or sometimes specific leadership conflict, whether between staff or among staff or with the congregation. Sometimes it's framed around change. Things are moving too fast here, or not fast enough. Ellen, I imagine you've seen that same pattern in your work, the surface issue rarely being the deepest one. How often is that presenting issue or that identified problem the underlying one?
Thanks, Bill. I would say when we are called, it almost never is what the ultimate finding will end up being, because the underlying root cause has so often been avoided or swept under the rug. And I would say that the longer this has been the case, the greater opportunity there is for conflict circumstances, big or small. It just becomes bigger and bigger and takes on new forms and new arms and legs as it goes along. So, and sometimes we find out that there's a history of a couple hundred years of a pattern that just needs to be addressed so that a congregation can find their footing and remember who they are and what God's calling them to. So So thanks for asking. And I guess I would pass it off to Bill. Why do you think that is, Bill Wilson, that congregations so often miss the deeper problem?
Well, I agree completely. This is a pervasive issue and it's not just in congregational life. When you did therapy with families or couples, often the identified patient was simply the one who raised the flag and said, something's amiss here. When I was a youth minister, it was always the teenager who acted out, but the real issue was mom and dad over here, whatever. And I think part of the human nature is to, biblically speaking, to scapegoat. I mean, it's a great Old Testament image that we're going to find somebody to blame for something. And so there's a tendency to defer or to misalign the issue around an individual, especially. We see it in clergy being often the scapegoat, or particular lay people. Part of the issue is, I think we're afraid of what might happen if we actually ask the hard questions. Mm-hmm. We'd rather fire someone and move on to the next one than really deal with the issue. And so I think it's a great fear. Our culture, certainly being as polarized as it is, encourages this kind of quick fix, you're fired, move away, and we're all better. And what we've learned the hard way is that those kind of scenarios usually have about a 10-year tail that wags. The old dinosaur, tail is long. When you dismiss a senior pastor, for example, most studies show that it's a 10-year collateral damage model, and congregations keep wondering. Well, I dealt with one church that had 3 pastors in 9 years. And the old boy asking us to help him, and we basically said, we can't help you with that. We'll help you with conflict. And well, we don't have any conflict. He's gone. So, well, maybe there's a consistent theme here, and it's not your clergy, it's your congregation. He said, no, the issue is you can't find good help anymore. I said, well, as long as you think that, you're going to continue to find that. And until you're willing to really engage in what's going on beneath the surface. And they basically said, thanks for the advice, and we're going to move on and find us a new pastor. Well, we know what's going to happen with that. But I think fear is a big part of it. You all may have other thoughts about why people are afraid to face the real issue, not just the presenting symptom.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Joel.
Well, I was going to say, to me, there's a medical analogy. People will often present to their physician, I've got, I don't know, lumbago, whatever that is, or something like that. And they want the doctor to take their self-diagnosis and begin to treat it. And until they name the real issue, you can't. And I think we've all had people in congregations who did not want to name it for fear that might really be it. And that seemed dire to them.
Joel, I would completely agree with that. I would also say that one of the things that as consultants we have the advantage of is the bigger picture. And if you're in the middle of a conflict situation, it's so challenging to be able to see outside of your own bubble of what it is that's causing you pain or discomfort. So it helping groups of people to see through what I would call looking through someone else's window, if you will, to be able to see that it might be a bigger or a different picture, and that the vulnerability that someone is feeling it is something that is scary, understandably, but also something that can be named and will be less scary if it is.
Yeah, let me add a quick layer to that. One reason I've seen is that congregations miss the deeper issues is because they are so convinced that, more surface problems, those feel solvable. You can vote on a budget, you can change a service time, you can rewrite a job description. We can fix that, but when you have to start naming grief or fear or a loss or lack of identity, that requires real courage and spiritual courage and discernment, and that's harder work, and it takes the whole congregation to change, not just the circumstance. And so that's, I think, to your point, Ellen, I think that's when an outside uh, participant can really help and bring value.
Well, we haven't heard
I
from
would,
Frank yet. So,
yeah,
Frank, yeah.
I was going to mention that I do think sometimes that one of the things people are afraid of is they're afraid that somebody might get angry if we start to talk about this. And these other issues are certainly a part of why people are afraid and why they avoid, but sometimes it's even at the emotional level. And people, because a lot of people don't like anger in the church. They run from it.
Yeah.
So, Frank, what advantages would there be to calling a group CHC, for instance, to come in?
But Bill made me think of that first, just when he began to talk about being afraid. Emotions run high, anxieties will rise in the midst of all of that. And I think one of the things that somebody coming in from the outside can really provide is a safe space to be able to have those kind of difficult conversations. Creating that safe space, it allows for some invitation to enter in. And as you were talking about, Ellen, there's just a real sense of objectivity, being able to see that bigger picture from 30,000 feet. And that kind of objectivity gives a good place to ask some curious questions. Sometimes they're a little probing, but they're come out of curiosity and a real sense of trying to find some understanding. Sometimes those questions are really necessary questions that need to be asked.
One of the things I think we found is that the outsider can what we call normalize conflict and reassure the congregation they're not broken. There's nothing. This is not. You're not bad because you disagree, and even you've got open conflict. You know, the Hartford Seminary study a few years ago found that 75% of churches have experienced severe conflict in the last 5 years. And that actually, Bullard's book a few years ago, Every Church Needs a Little Conflict. You know, it's sort of, so we're not evil people because we disagree about this. And so that the outsider can come in and say, everybody take a deep breath, calm down. This is pretty normal, just like it is in your family, just like it is at your workplace. Anytime you put two people together, you're going to have three opinions about something. And so let's just relax a bit. And sometimes I think that does help, Joel, create some space, like Frank said, where people can begin to have conversations without the fear that this is going to permanently destroy our congregation. That's often what we hear people say.
I want to loop back and Bill Owen, something you said made me think about, what is the source of this? And it might have been going on for a while. I've heard you talk before. One of the questions we often ask in a congregation, is this the first time you've seen something like this, or is this a part of a pattern? Talk about that for just a minute.
Well, that's the thing, and that's the memory piece that we go back to, and the having a shared sense of who we are when we're at our best often gets conflicted by the loss, and maybe it's pastoral transition, as Bill mentioned earlier. Those can happen repeatedly, and to begin to help folks look at the same timeline and what we've experienced, who we are, helps a congregation to name those things and realize, hey, we have been here before, and this is something that we'll continue to repeat if we don't address those things. And really just shining the light on those things and looking at that together and having conversation around it is what is of real value to the congregation.
Yeah, I've seen congregations when somebody will name something from the past and somebody will start to disagree and say, no, that's not anything like this. And somebody else will pipe up and say, no, that's exactly what this is. And when they can see that thread, the light begins to dawn.
Joel, we had a church recently that we did that kind of study. We asked that very question that you mentioned, and it took a while for them to own it, but they had to say, well, there was this time in the 60s. The presenting issue, by the way, was sexual identity issues currently. This guy said, in the 60s, I remember when the deacons locked arms across the front door to keep African American people from attending. And everybody, what? You know, most people were not there at that time. It's a southern city. And then somebody said, well, I remember the battle we had over divorced people serving as deacons. We lost families over that. And then somebody else said, well, I remember the fight we had over women serving as deacons. So we ended up with 5 episodes over about 60 years. And the pattern was the same. The issue shifted with culture, of course. And so once we named that, we said, now, have you learned anything from having gone through this 5 times and having 5 mini splits or major splits? And it was a kind of a breakthrough moment for that congregation to acknowledge our history. We're doomed to repeat it if we don't own it. And so it led to a very different conversation than we would have had otherwise.
Well, a lot of times when I'm with you all as colleagues, I hear things that just spurs other thoughts in my mind. What have you heard today from someone else that you would like to expand a little bit?
One thing is this very issue of hearing. I think that that's a skill that an outsider brings into the situation. People in the church who are asking for some group to come in or some individual to come in, like the Center for Healthy Churches, may be expecting someone to come in and solve the problem for them, tell them what to do. And really, the first thing we do is listen. And in that space of asking questions, to really listen and help them listen for those kind of connecting themes.
Joel, I think one of the things that I'm always interested in this kind of a setting is not just, we can tell stories all day about unhealthy congregations. I want to talk about healthy congregations and what is the preventive work that keeps congregations and families and other things from falling into the trap of truly destructive conflict. You know, we have these 5 traits of a healthy congregation. And I think one of the helpful things we bring to the table is not just remedial work, but preventive work. And the more we talk about that, the more we describe the traits of a healthy congregation, healthy leadership, healthy pastoral leadership, healthy lay leadership, it's kind of inoculating people a bit against the kind of really dis-ease that will often, I mean, this can exacerbate the demise of a church if it's not treated. It's like an illness. If you don't treat this, it'll kill you, and it will kill a church.
Bill, that brings to mind a church that I worked with recently who really on the surface wasn't dealing at all or called me at all for any conflict situation. They have changes coming up. And one of the things that I was brought on to do was to interview and work with many of the staff and volunteers and just get to know them better and helping them assess their vision for the future. And out of it, because one of the things that generated the whole thing happening was that a couple of longtime, very loved people are just retiring. And in the conversations, it was amazing how many times the story of many, many years ago when something almost split the church popped up in private conversations with me. And when I went back and shared that with everybody, they were like, oh my gosh, we haven't thought about that in years. But that fear of things coming up, what just struck, there's nothing more vulnerable, no more vulnerable place we are than our relationship with God and church. And so those fears started bubbling up. And once they were named, it was so much easier to say, well, let's look at where you are right now and see what you can do to learn about what that might look like for your future.
Bill Wilson, you mentioned about preventative. I'd also like to give a hopeful word about the far side because, Bill, you and I assisted you with a church that I don't think either one of us would have thought there was much chance at all. And I think all of us have had congregations that have really come out on the far side in a wonderful place.
I do think, and we'll have another one of these, we talk about conflict transformation, that rather than just intervention or remediation, that it becomes a transformative moment in the life of the congregation. And it happens. It can happen. It's biblical. It's Paul and Timothy. They split, but they come back together. There's all that. One example that I think, or a couple, a church that we worked with in Louisville, we had done the congregational gatherings, people around tables, 6 to 8 people at a conversation. And they basically said, we've never done this before. And so after the process was over, they said, do you think we can keep doing this?
Yeah.
And so they would meet, they went on, one of their changes in their congregational life was to monthly have a gathering where a topic was raised and they had civil conversation about it around tables in smaller groups. This is not town hall, somebody making a speech. And I love that. They called it wrestle. And the notion was, we're going to come together and we're going to wrestle with issues in a safe way, in a safe place. And man, you talk about something that kind of lowers the temperature of the congregation, takes them down the conflict pyramid, so to speak, and gives them a chance to have conversations and model what mature people can do, disagree agreeably, all that kind of talk. They just had never seen it. And so it was a preventive move that came out of a pretty severe conflict that in the long run, I think made them a much healthier congregation.
Well, I'm a native Baptist, although my wife and I are now members of an Episcopal church, but we've all served across denominations, and some faith traditions have a greater heritage of congregational polity where they talk, and others don't. And I think we've found most of those, not that we're trying to advocate a particular polity, but that opportunity to talk with each other is like light shining.
Open up the drapes, let some light in the room, and throw the windows open, and let's talk.
Well, let me ask you, all of you are so, well versed in this area of work. What are some resources that you might recommend to a church leader, pastor, to consider gaining some ideas or some background on this?
Well, I would jump in with where Bill Wilson took us a few minutes ago with the preventative work. I think, and I'm sure all of us will point out some wonderful conflict resolution books, and we have some in our midst who have written those books. But from the get-go, I think understanding family systems theory, everybody should read Generation to Generation, in my opinion. And I still say that Failure of Nerve is one of the best leadership books ever written. I don't think it gets any better than Stephen Covey. Of course, there's the famous 7 Habits, but there's Speed of Trust is an excellent book. And then I think for myself, as also a pastor, keeping on top of current offerings. In San Francisco, there's an organization called Community at Work. They offer wonderful workshops that are just zeroed in on different facets of nonprofit, faith communities, and corporate world. And you can just stay on top of things in your area and be a part of networking groups, other pastors groups, just to find out what's happening out there and new ways of thinking.
I don't want to toot our horn too much, but the CAC material on R12 or Romans 12 that Matt Cook really worked hard at has some amazingly helpful preventive exercises based on Scripture. And I think that's some of the best material I've seen in a long time on A, how do you deal with conflict, but B, how do you create a culture, a high trust culture, rather than a low trust, which is often, and that's Covey stuff, there's the 12, things you can do to build trust. But Matt's material is just superb around even creating some people who are comfortable with conflict to be first responders when the little fire breaks out, to go in and deal with that issue in a redemptive way, biblical way, rather than just ignore it or try to brush it away, and it turns into a big conflagration. But if you haven't seen the R12 material, it's on our website. It is superb in the realm of preventing conflict or doing some things to kind of inoculate your congregation against it.
And I'll mention in one of these episodes in this series, Matt talks about R12.
Good.
I've lost track of
Great
which
stuff.
number that is, but if you'll look, you can find that.
Couple of books that just really have some tools for conversation and understanding that I've come across, you may know of. One is called I Never Thought of It That Way. It's a book that came out just a few years ago and really kind of grounded what spurned it is the difficulty we have in our political world. But I think there's a lot of application just in tools for having hard conversations or having conversations with people you really disagree with. One of the other ones, I think in probably its third edition, is Crucial Conversations.
That's a good book.
Yeah.
That's very good.
I might mention one of our own, David Brubaker's book, When the Center Doesn't Hold. It's outstanding. David it is excellent. And Bill, what's that book that early on, Elephant in the Boardroom?
The Elephant in the Boardroom.
The Elephant in the Boardroom is helpful.
About leadership transitions and
transitions and stuff, and but gets it.
There's a great book, the thin book, The Art of Naming Elephants.
Yeah.
Which is another piece that
that's right.
It's a lot of fun, and when people start naming elephants, you get into it's like the Animal Farm game that we have, where we invite people, using 7 different animals to talk about that. I find many times if you go straight at people about conflict, the defenses go up and they get very resistant. If you come in from the side, and one of Friedman's idea was always come in, with humor or lighten the tone a bit before you really lay the heavy stuff on. The Animal Farm game will surface a lot of latent conflict or issues that people are frightened to speak of because they're afraid of the outcome. So that's another great tool. We've got that on our website. People are welcome to use it. It's a free resource.
Well, listen, I want to thank each of you today for your time and your expertise. Something I would like to say, if you're watching this, if you will go to the resource tab on churches.org and look for our team, you'll find our contact information, and we would welcome you reaching out. Contact us, we'll answer you, and we'll see what we might be able to do to help you. But we all do this work because we love the church, and we'd welcome the opportunity to love your church. Thank you.
Thank you.
You and I live in the midst of the most significant season of change in the history of the American church. And disagreement almost always comes along for the ride when changes are taking place. You are going to need both a mindset and a skill set for walking through disagreement in ways that fosters light rather than heat and love rather than anger. We think that this series will help you get started. And if after listening you realize that you need more assistance than a web series can provide, then give us a call. Our mission is to help your church be healthy. We consider it a privilege to walk alongside you.